Hello and welcome to our presentation. Within this video, we'll be analysing a clip from the popular television show Suits, and we'll be outlining whether theoretical hypotheses have occurred during a specific corporate change. Within this clip, the corporate change occurring is the proposed reassignment of the role of managing partner from Jessica Pearson to Daniel Hardman. In analysing the dynamics between the case's stakeholders, including unnamed partners within the firm, we've decided to take a narrower theoretical perspective to grant closer attention to the key actors involved in the organisational change, which will help offer a more comprehensive analysis of the implications of how power and communication are coordinated within the organisation. Suits is a fictional show based on reality, and when assessing the utility of this TV show as a source of corporate change, we must acknowledge that certain aspects of the show may be over-dramatised for entertainment purposes. But at the same time, the show gives realistic reactions, human dynamics, and power struggles from which we have based our analysis. Now, before we dive into the theoretical analysis, we will firstly provide a succinct summary of this Suits clip in order to give some context. Pearson Spector Litt is a law firm with a managing director known as Jessica Pearson and numerous other senior partners such as Harvey Specter and Lewis Litt. After a long controversial history with the firm, Daniel Hardman, who is currently not a part of the firm, is attempting a hostile takeover by offering to share a client worth billions with the law firm if they allow him back into the company. Jessica, Harvey, and Lewis know that this is an attempt to regain control of the firm. However, with this client having the potential to line the pockets of all of the senior partners, many of them are swayed by this offer and want Jessica to accept. This causes two sides to emerge between the senior partners into those that back Jessica to remain as managing partner and those that back Daniel. And since the senior partners can vote as to who should be the managing director, Jessica's position is at risk. There are many instances within this 10-minute clip where theory covered in our lectures is on display, as each party is using different tactics in order to secure votes.
So the first theory that we will be applying to this case in Suits will be French and Raven's 5 forms of power. The 5 forms of power is a perspective that regards power as an individual property, a particular power that arises due to an individual's characteristics or situation, and which may be deemed formal or informal. The forms of power provide utility in initially making sense of a situation and mapping out what forms of power are in operation. The 5 forms of power are expert power, informational power, referent power, coercive power, and legitimate power. A 6th form of power was later added, informational power. We will first be focusing on informational power. Informational power is the 6th later added base of power and refers to the way information can mold how people think and behave. A new piece of information can reshape people's viewpoint and their subsequent behavior. So the application to the clip that we've showed you is that when in the boardroom scene, where votes are to be taken by the partners to decide on Jessica versus Daniel as managing partner, people in the room are initially very divided in opinion, with many teetering in the middle. Harvey enters the room with a piece of paper, a piece of core information, which molds freshly renewed opinions from the stakeholders in the room. The side of Jessica and Harvey relies so heavily in their game plan that they find this red smoking gun in the termination letter, as they are completely aware of the huge tipping of scales that this information could bring. The partners all end up voting for Jessica to stay as managing partner due to Jessica's increased informational power, amongst other factors discussed. So, an interesting point of consideration within the notion of informational power is looking at the verity of the source information given, and whether that affects people's viewpoints and subsequent behavior or actions. Typically, as seems to be a theme with Raven's forms of power, we once again return to the idea of power being perceptive, with informational power specifically focusing on actors' perception of the information given. Actors could be asking themselves questions all the way from, is this information reliable? Is the person who gave me the information reliable? To, do I even care about this information? Does this information change anything? An additional point of interest, Feldman actually summarizes informational power as the most transitory type of power. If one gives information away, then the power is given away. So this is a potential critique to the analysis in the sense that the information is given away, but we are arguing that the power is actually gained from showing this information. It's two different perspectives on the issue. Investigating further reading provides some astute insights into decision-making and considerations behind how a leader chooses to portray and use their power to achieve desired results within the firm. Kovac 2020 tells us that employee motivation can be altered based on the type of power his or her supervisor exhibits, emphasizing the need for a leader's power to be exhibited optimally, especially relevant in a high-stress, top-of-the-top atmosphere such as Jessica Pearson's New York law firm. Payton 2019 goes on to distinguish between soft and hard power as two main approaches, with hard power mainly being reward, coercive, legitimate power, and soft power tending towards expert, referent, and informational power. They state that overall we found that leaders' use of hard power relates to higher levels of suboptimal motivational outlooks in followers, while leaders' use of power is connected to higher levels of optimal motivational outlooks in followers. Followers' motivational outlooks were also related to their intentions to perform favorably for their organizations. So the last point here is key to the case throughout, as all actors recognize that at the end of the day, people will want to perform for their organizations, but usually only for a leader they believe in. If this is the case, motivational outlook skyrockets. The implications of this mean that leaders in the real world organizations need to have a deep and sometimes personal understanding of their employees and teams and their motivation levels alongside their perception of the leader's power. Depending on these factors, the leader must determine how to portray and use their forms of power to achieve results.
Moving on to our second point of focus, referent power, an informal type of power, is based upon the perception of the leader. If someone is likable, others are more likely to go along with what they are suggesting other people to do. So in the case, Harvey turned up last minute to a meeting with new information against Hardman and gives a personal appraisal to Jessica's leadership and management style, saying things like she sees everyone at the firm not as employees, not even as friends.
We're family.
And because Harvey is excellent at his job and is a highly admired lawyer, he displayed referent power by swaying the voters to unanimously choose for Jessica. At this crucial point in the scene, just before the vote is to take place, the voting power between Jessica and Hardman is really kind of split, but Harvey Specter provided new information, the termination letter, that illuminated the significant wrongdoings of Hardman, thus diminishing his reputation and his case for replacing Jessica. In response to Harvey's revelation and recommendation for Jessica, the other actors, or the directors, unanimously decided to vote for Jessica. A strong case can be made that due to Harvey being so well admired and respected within the company, his referent power was influential enough to actually sway the votes without anybody even checking the validity of his evidence, because people were so quick to take his side due to the positive perception that the other directors had of him. However, a criticism of referent power as a theory is the issue of cause and effect, insofar that one cannot necessarily determine whether an individual is liked and admired because they are perceived to already have power and influence, which could benefit other people, or whether in fact individuals gain power for already being liked and respected without ulterior motives being at play. There is, unfortunately, no means by which we can know which factor, i.e. power or likability, influences the other more. Drawing upon the literature, Kurdish et al. 1995 found that charisma and referent power are actually two empirically distinct concepts, and that charisma produces its own unique predictions of subordinate attitudes outside of referent power. For example, the author's findings suggest that when leaders demonstrate charismatic behaviours such as communicating a sense of vision, articulating a strong sense of a corporate mission, and showing enthusiasm for the future of the organisation, subordinate satisfaction with supervision should increase. Accordingly, one can infer that managers can work upon cultivating referent power from their employees, and managers can abandon any notion that one can either be liked or disliked in an organisational setting. Managers like Jessica can use charisma to build relationships with their subordinates, and in turn increase trust and faith for the firm management. This can subsequently reinforce any power bases, such as expert power, as more satisfied employees are less likely to challenge the status quo and the manager's judgment and their behaviours, and therefore less likely to call for a vote of no confidence.
So, the second theory that we'll be covering and applying to this case is the general functional body of change management literature. So, the general body of functional change management literature is written as guidance for change makers. Now, this takes the position or the viewpoint of executives and top-level managers, and as such, it sees the power that these roles hold as legitimate. In contrast to this, it sees the politics of middle-level and lower managers as illegitimate, because this causes resistance to top-down change and also creates inertia within the organization. Gerard Egan is basically writing about his experiences and to try and explain what he labels as the shadow side of organizations. So this is basically all the aspects of a company that are covert or hidden but still affect its performance. And he writes this to try and be practical and aid change makers, and as such it often contrasts with more theoretical approaches. So Egan's theory starts with 6 different types of shadow behavior. So his recommendations towards change makers are very practical, and he says they should try and find these examples of shadow behavior within their companies and then address them, and basically do a cost-benefit analysis based on economic factors and also just how it affects the organization. Our further readings also touched on Tompkins' 1990, who helped us to better understand how politics arise within an organization, not from the top down, but from middle management and the neglect that they're shown by executives in feedback. So let's take this theory and apply it to the case at hand. So the first example of shadow behavior that we saw in this clip was organizational politics. And this is specifically in Daniel Hardman's pushing of his own agenda to try and stage a leadership coup. Now he does this through covert and very hidden behaviors. So for example, you've got his blackmail of Louis Litt, you've got his threats towards Jessica, and this is all very covert. It's classic organizational politics. The second example of shadow behavior that we found is organizational messiness. So Egan describes this as the reality of chaotic communication lines and roles within an organization, as opposed to what would be on a formal organizational chart and much more structured. So in this example, we see Lewis react as soon as the vote is called. It's very unexpected. He says to his secretary, "Cancel my day." And this shows how management are often affected by politics and drawn into the everyday reactionary politics rather than their usual role, which would be long-term planning, staffing, that sort of thing. The final and third example of shadow behavior that we found in this clip was subliminal culture. Now Egan describes this as views or shared opinions that are in an organization but aren't explicit, so they're implicit. The example that we found was the shared obsession with status and specifically being a named partner in the firm. So we see Jessica threatened by Jack Soloff with loss of this named partnership. We also see Daniel Hardman use it as bargaining power. So this just shows how the culture values that status and puts it on a pedestal. Okay, so let's move on to a critique of this theory. So the general body of functional change management literature seeks to aid practitioners and basically help them with their change management. So as such, its focus on politics within the organization is, as we deem it, very apt and useful for managers. It also very well avoids the trap that it could fall into of solely blaming middle managers. We see that politics arises from middle managers, but it doesn't fall into the trap of blaming them and instead places responsibility on top level management and executives and even change makers to give feedback to these middle managers as an antidote to the potential for them to fall into politics as a survival tactic. So overall, we see this as a great strength. The weakness that we found within this theory was the focus on top level managers as almost perfect. They're very legitimate and the only legitimate source of power, when in fact we deem that they can also be a source of politics themselves as well as middle managers. And so that was the weakness that we thought was existent within this theory.
In conclusion, through critical analysis of the Suits case, we have generated insights into leading and managing change, specifically into a firm's power politics, human dynamics, and other organizational hurdles. A deep dive into Raven's forms of power, summarized actions taken by stakeholders, while providing further discussion into the reasoning and results of such actions. Working towards a holistic approach, the case was also tackled from an alternative direction, the functional change management lens. Alongside previous analysis, analysis, through exploration of ideas such as organisational messiness, we arrive at the end of our presentation with a strong idea of why key actors such as Jessica and Harvey took the actions that they did. Thank you.